It was an ordinary Saturday afternoon deep in the South Australian outback, the kind of day when nothing seems out of place. A faint wind rolled over the red plains, and the sun hung heavy above Oak Park Station, a remote cattle property about 40 kilometres south of Junta. Inside the small homestead, the Lamont family were winding down after another long, dry week. Before we begin, let me know where you're joining from tonight. Your voice matters in stories like this. Share it in the comments. And if you value real cases told with respect, consider subscribing. 4-year-old Augustus Gus Lamont played near the front yard, his laughter blending with the sound of dogs and creaking gates. Gus lived there with his mother Jess, baby brother Ronnie, and his grandparents who ran the property. It wasn't an easy life, but it was a safe and predictable one. A world where every sound, every movement, meant something familiar. Around 5 p.m., Gus's grandmother glanced out toward the yard. He was still there, playing in the dust, dressed in his long-sleeved shirt, small boots, and a wide hat that shaded his face from the fierce sun. She called out a reminder not to wander too far, the sort of routine warning every country child hears a dozen times a day. Half an hour later, at 5:30 p.m., she stepped outside again to call him in for dinner. The dogs barked, the gate rattled. But Gus didn't answer. She looked toward the sheds, expecting to see his hat bobbing between the fences. Instead, there was only silence. At first, it felt like one of those harmless moments when a child hides just to be cheeky. The family began checking the usual spots, behind the water tank, inside the sheds, near the small dam behind the house. Minutes later, the quiet turned heavy. Jess called his name again and again, her voice rising across the paddock. By 6 p.m., her father was on a quad bike, tracing the perimeter of the property. Still nothing. As the sun slipped behind the low hills, the light faded into a burnt orange haze. Voices echoed across the open land, but there was no answer. The search widened. Fences, gullies, tool sheds, every patch of grass and red dirt that a small child could possibly reach. And yet, there were no footprints, no broken twigs, no signs of a struggle. Nothing at all. By 8:30 p.m., after more than 3 hours of frantic searching, Jess made the call to police. Within the hour, officers from Junta and Peterborough stations were en route. As night took hold, the property transformed into a search zone, headlights, flashlights, and the sharp crackle of police radios filling the darkness. Officers mapped out grids and set up checkpoints. Volunteers from neighbouring stations arrived to help. What struck everyone that night was the silence. In the outback, sound travels far. A dog's bark can carry for kilometres, yet the land gave nothing back. Not a cry, not a rustle, just stillness. By midnight, the immediate area around the homestead had been completely swept. No sign of entry or exit, no misplaced items, no tracks in the dirt. It was as if Gus had vanished between one heartbeat and the next. That half-hour gap, between 5 o'clock and 5:30 p.m., became the centre of the mystery. At first light, the red earth of Oak Park Station came alive with movement. Police, volunteers, and family members formed long lines across the paddocks, walking shoulder to shoulder in measured steps. Radios buzzed, and helicopters hovered above, scanning the terrain. Within hours, South Australia Police had mobilised one of the largest search operations the region had seen in years. State emergency service teams arrived with off-road vehicles, infrared cameras, and drones programmed to sweep the entire 6,000-hectare property. The early plan was straightforward: start from the homestead and move outward in expanding circles. It was a method proven effective in previous missing child cases. But Oak Park was no ordinary place. From the air, it looked endless. Red earth broken only by saltbush, dry creek beds, and scattered scrub. Heat shimmered off the ground, blurring the horizon. By mid-morning, the temperature had already climbed past 25 degrees, and the wind kicked up dust thick enough to reduce visibility to almost nothing. Searchers moved carefully, marking each sector on GPS. Helicopters circled overhead using thermal imaging to detect any trace of body heat, while Aboriginal trackers studied the dirt for subtle disturbances. The faint print of a child's shoe, a broken crust, a bent twig. Dozens of volunteers arrived from nearby towns, farmers, station workers, even off-duty firefighters. Many had never met the Lamonts, but felt compelled to help. "We'll find him," one man said to a reporter. "You don't just lose a kid out here without something showing where he went." For 2 full days, hundreds of people searched side by side, calling his name through the heat and dust. Late on the second day, a flicker of hope emerged, a small boot print about 500 meters north of the homestead. It looked like the kind of footwear Gus had been wearing. Excitement rippled through the teams. Police marked the site, photographed it, and sent it for analysis. For a brief moment, everyone believed the breakthrough had come. Then the results came back. The print was too large and inconsistent with Gus's shoe size. It belonged to one of the searchers. The only potential lead evaporated. The search didn't stop. Helicopters continued sweeping the vast distance between Oak Park and the barrier highway. Crews checked every dam, every well, and every fence line. Drones flew repeated passes through the scrub. Night vision equipment scanned until long after midnight. But the red soil offered no answers. There were no footprints, no scraps of fabric, no scuff marks, no disturbed ground. Nothing to suggest where a 4-year-old could have gone. Trackers described the land as clean ground, untouched, as if nothing small had passed through at all. By the end of the first week, exhaustion had set in. The days were brutally hot, the nights icy cold. Experts warned that survival without water or shelter in those conditions would be measured in hours, not days. On October 7th, after 10 days of relentless searching, South Australia Police announced they were scaling back operations. The official statement was short and devastating. Despite extensive efforts and the use of all available technology, there is no sign of Augustus Lamont. The rescue had become a mystery. Hundreds of people had combed the land. More than 6,000 hectares had been searched by air and foot, yet there wasn't a single confirmed clue. For those who had walked that ground, the question echoed louder than ever. How can a child vanish in daylight, in open country, without leaving a single trace? When the official search for Gus Lamont was scaled back on October the 7th, it wasn't because anyone wanted to stop. It was because the numbers left no choice. For 10 days, hundreds of people, police officers, volunteers, and Australian Defence Force personnel had covered more than 6,000 hectares of rugged terrain. They had walked every grid, checked every gully, and scanned every possible location from the air, but the Outback had offered nothing in return. No footprints, no clothing, no sign of movement. The land was silent, and in that silence the story of Gus Lamont turned from a rescue mission into one of Australia's most haunting mysteries. Police made the decision clinically, based on survival data. Medical experts advised that a 4-year-old exposed to the elements in that part of South Australia could not endure more than 24 to 48 hours without water or shelter. The daytime heat reached close to 28 degrees, while nights dropped to near freezing. The numbers were grim. Deputy Commissioner Linda Williams later said that every resource had been used. "We exhausted all possible avenues in the field search. The investigation now moves to review and analysis." For the Lamont family, those words landed like stones. In just over a week, the property had gone from a plum, ace-filled with search teams, vehicles and noise, to silence again. The helicopters were gone. The floodlights were packed away. And in their absence, the only thing left behind was an unanswered question. Where did Gus go? Even the trackers were baffled. Aboriginal trackers, brought in for their expertise in reading faint ground signs, described the land around Oak Park as clean. No disturbed soil, no broken twigs, no movement. It looked, in their words, untouched since the morning he vanished. Normally, even in difficult terrain, the earth tells a story. A boot scuff, a shift in dust, a bent stem of saltbush. But here, there was none of it. The red soil seemed almost defiant, erasing everything before anyone could find it. Search logs confirmed that not a single item belonging to Gus had ever been recovered. Not his hat, not his boots, not a single fibre of clothing. For detectives, it was deeply troubling. Even in tragic cases of exposure, some trace is usually found. A footprint, a small item, or even remains. The complete absence of evidence meant one of two things. Either the environment had somehow concealed every trace, or Gus had never moved far from where he was last seen. As the official operation shifted from rescue to investigation, 3 working theories began to take shape. Each made sense on its own, yet none could fully explain the disappearance. The first and most natural explanation was that Gus simply wandered away. Children are curious, easily distracted, and often underestimate distance. In countless similar cases, young kids have been found just beyond the initial search zone, often disoriented or sheltering. Police initially built their search strategy around this assumption. The grids, drones, and aerial sweeps were all designed to locate a child close to home. The plan was to find him alive, tired, maybe scared, but within range. But as the days went on, this theory began to collapse. A wander-off leaves a pattern displaced soil, broken vegetation, tiny shoe prints. Yet trackers found nothing. The single possible footprint discovered early in the search turned out to belong to a volunteer. Even after 10 days of searching, there wasn't a single confirmed indication that Gus had walked beyond the homestead. Forensic search coordinators later said it was statistically impossible for a child to cover significant ground without leaving traceable signs. The lack of evidence didn't just weaken the wander-off theory, it almost erased it. When nature offers no explanation, investigators turn to human ones. If Gus didn't leave on his own, could someone have taken him? Criminologist Dr. Xanthe Mallet, who followed the case closely, told media that the timeline itself raised concern. 30 minutes is a very narrow window for a disappearance with no sign of movement. When you have that kind of gap, you must consider external involvement. Former homicide detective Gary Jubelin echoed the same thought. When a child vanishes and there are no footprints, no drag marks, no discarded items, you have to consider the alternative that he was removed quickly and efficiently. The idea was chilling. An abduction from a remote property miles from the nearest town. But that theory also came with its own complications. Oak Park is isolated, accessible only by rough dirt tracks and private gates. There are no casual visitors, no nearby roads with regular traffic. Police reviewed every vehicle movement in the area that day, including highway CCTV and nearby roadhouse logs. They found no sign of any unknown vehicle, and no witness recalled anything unusual. If someone had entered and left the property, they'd done it without leaving tire marks, footprints, or noise, an unlikely feat in such an open, exposed environment. The third theory didn't come from police, but Fry's, from within the volunteer community itself. A former SES member who participated in the early days of the search suggested that perhaps the focus area had been wrong from the start. He argued that the assumption that Gus had wandered outward might have led everyone to look in the wrong direction entirely. If all known terrain within the 10-kilometer radius was covered and nothing was found, he said, then maybe the starting point wasn't what we thought. This theory points to a logistical failure, not foul play. Perhaps the child never left the immediate yard. Perhaps the disappearance occurred differently than anyone initially assumed. It was a theory born not from suspicion, but from frustration. Even today, many of those who were on the ground believe something fundamental about that first hour was misunderstood. Once the active field search ended, the investigation moved under Major Crimes Missing Persons Branch. Their work was slower, more technical, focused on analyzing drone footage, reviewing radio logs, and verifying every sighting or report that came in afterward. But as the ground teams withdrew, another force took over: the internet. Within hours of the police announcement, social media erupted. Posts, photos, and so-called theories began flooding platforms, many from anonymous accounts, some even from outside Australia. People claimed to have spotted a child matching Gus's description near truck stops or rural roads. Others circulated AI-generated images that looked convincing at first glance, until police confirmed they were fake. Some of the posts crossed into dangerous territory, openly accusing members of the Lamont family. Rumors spread faster than facts, and every new false claim forced the family to relive the nightmare all over again. For Gus Lamont and her parents, the scrutiny was brutal. They had cooperated with police from the start, answering every question, allowing full searches of their property, and submitting to multiple interviews. But online, none of that mattered. Comment sections filled with strangers speculating about their lives, their tone in interviews, even the way they stood during press conferences. It was judgment by pixels, not facts. Police media liaison officers issued repeated statements urging restraint. One read simply, "Unverified online claims are causing distress to the family and hindering our investigation. Please rely only on official police updates." But the digital wildfire was already out of control. Within days, false timeline breakdown videos appeared with dramatic thumbnails, promising the truth about what happened. None were based on verified information. For the Lamont family, it was a second tragedy. Public suspicion piled on top of personal loss. Meanwhile, the volunteers who had searched for Gus faced their own kind of grief. Many described the same hollow feeling. They had walked every meter they were told to, done everything right, and still found nothing. One SES volunteer said later, "You don't just lose a kid in open country without a trace. It didn't feel right. We missed something. We must have." That sentiment echoed through nearby towns like Yunta and Peterborough. Pride in the effort, but deep unease about the outcome. Deputy Commissioner Linda Williams publicly thanked every person who participated, reminding the public that the case was still active under major crime. "The family deserves answers," she said, "and we are committed to finding them." Behind the scenes, detectives continued to analyze drone footage, GPS logs, and vehicle records. But weeks passed, and no new evidence emerged. In that silence, the story of Gus Lamont split into two realities, one grounded in facts and official investigation, and another fueled by online speculation. Between those two worlds sat the red earth of Oak Park Station, the place where a little boy vanished and where the truth still refuses to show itself. The dust of Oak Park settled quickly once the search crews left. The sound of rotor blades and engines faded, replaced once again by the vast quiet of the South Australian outback. The Lamont family stayed behind, staring into an emptiness that no one could explain. For most of Australia, the story of Gus Lamont had become another headline, a brief tragedy in a cycle of daily news. But for those who had been there, the silence after the search was unbearable. It was the sound of something unresolved, a question that the desert refused to answer. The Lamont's property remained sealed for several weeks, as investigators continued combing through the house, the sheds, and nearby outbuildings. Every item, every tool, every patch of earth within 200 meters of the home was examined. When those searches yielded nothing new, the police tape came down. Life at Oak Park tried to resume, but it couldn't. The place that had once been filled with laughter and the chatter of a young boy now felt frozen in time. Gus Lamont, Gus's mother, later told a local journalist that she still left the back gate open at night, just in case. It was a small gesture, irrational maybe, but one that said more than words ever could. The family wasn't ready to believe he was gone. Not yet. Even after the field effort ended, the Major Crime Investigation Branch continued its work quietly. Detectives reviewed over 600 witness statements, reanalyzed digital maps from the search, and reconstructed the family's movements in the 48 hours leading up to Gus's disappearance. Police publicly confirmed that no one in the Lamont family was considered a suspect. Their accounts were consistent, and there was no evidence of harm or intent. The focus, instead, was on the land itself, and whether something hidden in that terrain could have concealed a child for good. A geospatial analysis conducted weeks later revealed small, unsearched pockets of terrain, deep hollows, rock crevices, and animal burrows that searchers may have missed in the first few days. Thermal imaging was redeployed over those zones, but still, nothing appeared. Forensic teams also took soil samples, hoping that scent or microtraces could indicate recent human contact. Again, the results were inconclusive. It was as though the land had simply swallowed him, whole and without trace. The Australian outback doesn't forgive mistakes easily. It's a landscape that looks flat and open from the sky, but hides countless dangers beneath its surface. There are sinkholes disguised by loose soil, narrow crevices filled with brush, and old mining shafts from generations past. Locals know them well and avoid them instinctively, but for a child of 4, any of them could be lethal. Police did inspect several of these hazards during the initial search, lowering cameras and using ground-penetrating radar where possible. But the scale was immense. Tens of thousands of natural cavities across the property and surrounding Crown land. Even the most exhaustive operation couldn't check them all. That's why even today, some investigators privately believe Gus may still be somewhere close to home, hidden not by people, but by the earth itself. In nearby towns like Peterborough and Yunta, the disappearance left a scar that hasn't healed. Community halls that once buzzed with activity turned into support centres, collecting food for volunteers and fuel donations during the search. Afterward, those same halls became spaces for grief. Locals gathered there for vigils, lighting candles under fading posters of Gus's smiling face. Many of those who searched said they still dream about that week. Some wake up at night convinced they missed something just meters away. One volunteer described it simply: "It's not just that we couldn't find him, it's that we found nothing at all. That's what breaks you." Even months later, people continued driving out to Oak Park, leaving small toys or flowers at the station gate. Strangers who never met Gus felt connected to his story, a shared ache for an answer that refused to come. Meanwhile, online speculation only grew louder. Videos claiming to have new evidence appeared across social media. Some featured voiceovers mimicking true crime documentaries. Others spliced together unrelated footage and presented it as fact. Police media teams fought a constant battle against misinformation. One spokesperson described it as trying to hold back a flood with your hands. Some posts even claimed Gus had been seen in distant parts of Australia, from truck stops to remote coastal towns. Every single lead was checked, and every one proved false. For the Lamont family, those claims reopened wounds that had barely begun to heal. Jess once said in an interview, "Every time someone posts a fake sighting, I lose another night's sleep. Hope hurts more than the truth." To protect the investigation, South Australia Police eventually limited the release of new details. Their updates became brief and carefully worded, focusing only on verified information. But that only fed more speculation. When the facts stopped coming, people start inventing their own. By early 2024, the official case file had grown to over 1,000 pages. Statements, drone logs, analysis reports, and digital maps layered in color-coded grids. Each section represented a different phase of the search, a different theory tested and eliminated. But what was missing, the single piece that tied everything together, was evidence. A senior investigator described the file as complete but empty. Everything was documented, and yet nothing was found. Theories continued to circulate within law enforcement circles. That Gus may have fallen into a natural cavity too deep to detect. That an animal encounter, though unlikely, could have removed trace evidence. Or that an unknown third party with precise timing managed to enter and leave the area undetected. None of these explanations fully satisfied the investigators, and none were provable. For families of missing persons, the absence of proof can be worse than tragedy. There's no closure, no ceremony, no moment when the world says goodbye. Just a constant waiting, a kind of grief that never ends. Psychologists call it ambiguous loss, a state where the mind can't process what happened because it doesn't know what to believe. The Lamonts live in that space every day. They've chosen not to move away from Oak Park. The land that took their son is still their home. Jess said she couldn't bear to leave because leaving would mean accepting that he's not coming back. Instead, they keep his room the same. Toys lined up, drawings still taped to the walls, as though he might walk through the door any minute. Over a year later, the case of Gus Lamont remains open, officially classified as a long-term missing person. Major Crime continues to review new information, and detectives revisit the site periodically whenever new technology or leads emerge. In recent months, specialized cadaver dogs trained to detect human scent in deep soil were deployed to the area, scanning specific sectors based on geological maps. Again, nothing was found. The investigation hasn't closed, but it hasn't moved forward either. Deputy Commissioner Linda Williams summed it up during a press briefing. It's one of the most perplexing disappearances we've faced. Every logical possibility has been explored, yet we're still missing the one thing that makes any of it make sense. Forensic experts say cases like this, where a child vanishes completely in daylight in a sparsely populated area, are among the rarest on record in Australia. There are fewer than a dozen with similar profiles, and none have been solved in full. The story of Gus Lamont has changed how South Australia police approach remote area disappearances. The Oak Park search prompted new protocols, including faster deployment of aerial imaging, expanded perimeter modelling, and mandatory involvement of local Aboriginal trackers from day one. It also renewed national conversations about missing persons, about how communities, media, and technology respond when a child disappears. Every year, during National Missing Persons Week, Gus's photo still appears alongside hundreds of others. His face, bright, smiling, innocent, now stands as a symbol for every child still unaccounted for. The hope is not only to find him, but to prevent the next child from becoming a mystery too. If you visit Oak Park Station today, there's no marker, no plaque, and no monument. The wind moves freely across the plains, and the house still stands quiet under the heat. The land looks unchanged, but those who know the story say it feels different now. Locals speak softly when they pass by, as though the ground itself holds secrets. Every once in a while, the family's old dog walks out toward the paddocks at dusk, following an unseen trail before returning at night. It's a small, haunting image, one that keeps the hope alive, even when logic says otherwise. Because in stories like this, hope is the only thing left that refuses to vanish. In the end, the case of Gus Lamont isn't defined by what was found, but by what wasn't. No evidence. No closure. No goodbye. Just the image of a little boy playing near a fence, a half hour before the world stopped making sense. Maybe the desert knows what happened. Maybe the wind does. But until someone, or something, reveals the truth, the mystery of Gus Lamont will remain exactly that. A question written in dust, still waiting for an answer. Before we end tonight, remember, this isn't just a story. Somewhere out there, a family still wakes up every morning not knowing what happened to their little boy. The land has gone quiet, but the questions remain loud. If you followed the search for Gus Lamont, keep his name in your thoughts and share his story with care. Real awareness doesn't come from rumor. It comes from respect. Here on Blacklight Investigation, we tell these cases not to sensationalize them, but to keep the light on the truth, no matter how faint it gets. If you believe in that, subscribe and stay with us as we keep exploring the stories that still need answers. Because somewhere, in the silence between fact and mystery, someone still knows what really happened.